Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Christopher, Jay, Kyle, Charlie and Haley, Jenny, Elaine, Robin, Nick, and Sonia. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's honor Earth Day with more from Our National Parks by John Muir, first published in 1901. Let's pick up right where we left off in Chapter 2, the Yellowstone National Park. Let's begin. One calm morning at sunrise, I saw the oaks and pines in Yosemite Valley shaken by an earthquake, their tops swishing back and forth, and every branch and needle shuddering as if in distress, like the frightened screaming birds. One may imagine the trembling, rocking, tumultuous waving of those ancient Yellowstone woods, and the terror of their inhabitants when the first foreboding shocks were felt. The sky grew dark, and rock-laden floods began to roar. But though they were close pressed and buried, cut off from sun and wind, all their happy leaf fluttering and waving done, other currents coursed through them, fondling and thrilling every fiber, and beautiful wood was replaced by beautiful stone. Now their rocky sepulchres are partly open, and show forth the natural beauty of death. After the forest times and fire times had passed away, and the volcanic furnaces were banked and held in abeyance, another great change occurred. The glacial winter came on. The sky was again darkened, not with dust and ashes, but with snow which fell in glorious abundance, piling deeper, deeper, slipping from the overladen heights in booming avalanches, compacting into glaciers that flowed over all the landscape, wiping off forests, grinding, sculpting, fashioning the comparatively featureless lava beds into the beautiful rhythm of hill and dale and ranges of mountains we behold today, forming basins for lakes, channels for streams, few soils for forests, gardens, and meadows. While this ice work was going on, the slumbering volcanic fires were boiling the subterranean waters, and with curious chemistry decomposing the rocks, making beauty in the darkness. These forces, seemingly antagonistic, working harmoniously together. How wild their meetings on the surface were, we may imagine. When the glacier period began, geysers and hot springs were playing in grander volume, it may be, than those of today. The glaciers flowed over them while they spouted and thundered, carrying away their fine sinter and travertine structures and shortening their mysterious channels. The soils made in the down grinding, required to bring the present features of the landscape into relief, are possibly no better than were some of the old volcanic soils that were carried away, and which, as we have seen, nourished magnificent forests. But the glacial landscapes are incomparably more beautiful than the old volcanic ones were. The glacial winter has passed away like the ancient summers and fire periods, though in the chronology of the geologist, all these times are recent. Only small residual glaciers on the cool northern slopes of the highest mountains are left of the vast, all-embracing ice mantle, as solfataras and geysers are all that are left of the ancient volcanoes. Now the post-glacial agents are at work on the grand old palimpsest of the park region, inscribing new characters. But still, in its main telling features, it remains distinctly glacial. The moraine soils are being leveled, sorted, refined, reformed, and covered with vegetation. The polished pavements and scoring and other superficial glacial inscriptions on the crumbling lavas are being rapidly obliterated. Gorges are being cut in the decomposed rhyolites and loose conglomerates, and turrets and pinnacles seem to be springing up like growing trees, while the geysers are depositing miles of sinter and travertine. Nevertheless, the icework is scarce blurred as yet. These later effects are only spots and wrinkles on the grand glacial countenance of the park. Perhaps you have already said that you have seen enough for a lifetime, but before you go away, you should spend at least one day and a night on a mountain top for a last general, calming, settling view. Mount Washburn is a good one for the purpose, because it stands in the middle of the park, is unencumbered with other peaks, and is so easy of access that the climb to its summit is only a saunter. First, your eye goes roving around the mountain rim amid the hundreds of peaks, some with plain flowing skirts, others abruptly precipitous and defended by sheer battlemented escarpments, flat-topped or round, heaving like sea waves, or spired and turreted like Gothic cathedrals, streaked with snow in the ravines, and darkened with files of adventurous trees climbing the ridges. The nearer peaks are perchance clad in sapphire blue, others far off in creamy white. In the broad glare of noon, they seem to shrink and crouch to less than half their real stature, and grow dull and uncommunicative, mere dead, draggled heaps of waste ashes and stone, giving no hint of the multitude of animals enjoying life in their fastnesses, or of the bright bloom-bordered streams and lakes. But when storms blow, they awake and arise, wearing robes of cloud and mist, in majestic speaking attitudes like gods. In the color glory of morning and evening, they become still more impressive. Steeped in the divine light of the alpenglow, their earthiness disappears, and blending with the heavens, they seem neither high nor low. Over all the central plateau, which from here seems level, and over the foothills and lower slopes of the mountains, the forest extends like a black, uniform bed of weeds, interrupted only by lakes and meadows, and small burned spots called parks, all of them, except the Yellowstone Lake, being mere dots and spangles in general views, made conspicuous by their color and brightness. About 85% of the entire area of the park is covered with trees, mostly the indomitable lodgepole pine, Pinus contorta, variety Murrayana, with a few patches and sprinklings of Douglas spruce, Engelmann spruce, silver fir, Abies lasiocarpa, Pinus flexilis, and a few alders, aspens, and birches. The Douglas spruce is found only on the lowest portions, the silver fir only on the highest, and the Engelmann spruce on the dampest places, best defended from fire. Some fine specimens of the flexilis pine are growing on the margins of openings, wide-branching, sturdy trees, as broad as high, with trunks 5 feet in diameter, leafy and shady, laden with purple cones and rose-colored flowers. The Engelmann spruce and subalpine silver fir are beautiful and notable trees, but as the plateau becomes drier and fires begin to run, they were driven up the mountains and into the wet spots and islands where we now find them, leaving nearly all the park to the lodgepole pine, which, though as thin-skinned as they, and is easily killed by fire, takes pains to store up its seeds in firmly closed cones, and holds them from 3 to 9 years, so that, let the fire come when it may, it is ready to die, and ready to live again in a new generation. For when the killing fires have devoured the leaves and thin resinous bark, many of the cones, only scorched, open as soon as the smoke clears away. The hoarded store of seeds is sown broadcast on the cleared ground, and a new growth immediately springs up, triumphant out of the ashes. Therefore this tree not only holds its ground, but extends its conquest farther after every fire. Thus the evenness and closeness of its growth are accounted for. In one part of the forest that I examined, the growth was about as close as a canebrake. The trees were from 4 to 8 inches in diameter, 100 feet high, and 175 years old. The lower limbs die young and drop off for want of light. Life with these close-planted trees is a race for light, more light, and so they push straight for the sky. Mowing off 10 feet from the top of the forest would make it look like a crowded mass of telegraph poles, for only the sunny tops are leafy. A sapling 10 years old, growing in the sunshine, has as many leaves as a crowded tree 100 or 200 years old. As fires are multiplied and the mountains become drier, this wonderful lodgepole pine bids fair to obtain possession of nearly all the forest ground in the west. How still the woods seem from here, yet how lively a stir the hidden animals are making, digging, gnawing, biting, eyes shining, at work and play, getting food, rearing young, roving through the underbrush, climbing the rocks, wading solitary marshes, tracing the banks of the lakes and streams. Insect swarms are dancing in the sunbeams, burrowing in the ground, diving, swimming, a cloud of witnesses telling nature's joy. The plants are as busy as the animals, every cell in a swirl of enjoyment, humming like a hive, singing the old, new song of creation. A few columns and puffs of steam are seen rising above the treetops, some near, but most of them far off, indicating geysers and hot springs, gentle-looking and noiseless as downy clouds, softly hinting the reaction going on between the surface and the hot interior. From here you see them better than when you are standing beside them, frightened and confused, regarding them as lawless cataclysms. The shocks and outbursts of earthquakes, volcanoes, geysers, storms, the pounding of waves, the uprush of sap in plants, each and all tell the orderly love beats of nature's heart. Turning to the eastward, you have the Grand Canyon and reaches of the river in full view, and yonder to the southward lies the Great Lake, the largest and most important of all the high fountains of the Missouri-Mississippi, and the last to be discovered. In the year 1541, when De Soto, with a romantic band of adventurers, was seeking gold and glory in the fountain of youth, he found the Mississippi a few hundred miles above its mouth and made his grave beneath its floods. La Salle in 1682, after discovering the Ohio, one of the largest and most beautiful branches of the Mississippi, traced the latter to the sea from the mouth of the Illinois through adventures and privations not easily realized now. About the same time, Joliet and Father Marquette reached the Father of Waters by way of the Wisconsin, but more than a century passed ere its highest sources in these mountains were seen. The advancing stream of civilization has ever followed its guidance toward the west, but none of the 1,000 tribes of Indians living on its banks could tell the explorer whence it came. From those romantic De Soto and La Salle days to these times of locomotives and tourists, how much has the great river seen and done? Great as it now is, and still growing longer through the ground of its delta and the basins of receding glaciers at its head, it was immensely broader toward the close of the glacial period, when the ice mantle of the mountains was melting. Then, with its 300,000 miles of branches outspread over the plains and valleys of the continent, laden with fertile mud, it made the biggest and most generous bed of soil in the world. Think of this mighty stream springing in the first place in vapor from the sea, flying on the wind, alighting on the mountains in hail and snow and rain, lingering in many a fountain feeding the trees and grass, then gathering its scattered waters, gliding from its noble lake, and going back home to the sea, singing all the way. On it sweeps through the gates of the mountains, across the vast prairies and plains, through many a wild, gloomy forest, canebrake and sunny savanna, from glaciers and snowbanks and pine woods to warm groves of magnolia and palm, geysers dancing at its head, keeping time with the sea waves at its mouth, roaring and gray in rapids, booming in broad, bossy falls, murmuring, gleaming in long, silvery reaches, swaying now hither, now thither, whirling, bending in huge doubling, eddying folds, serene, majestic, ungovernable, overflowing all its metes and bounds, frightening the dwellers upon its banks, building, wasting, uprooting, planting, engulfing old islands and making new ones, taking away fields and towns as if in sport, carrying canoes and ships of commerce in the midst of its spoils and drift, fertilizing the continent as one vast farm. Then, its work done, it gladly vanishes in its ocean home, welcomed by the waiting waves. Thus, naturally, standing here in the midst of its fountains, we trace the fortunes of the great river, and how much more comes to mind as we overlook this wonderful wilderness. Fountains of the Columbia and Colorado lie before us, interlaced with those of the Yellowstone and Missouri, and fine it would be to go with them to the Pacific. But the sun is already in the west, and soon our day will be done. Yonder is Amethyst Mountain, and other mountains hardly less rich in old forests, which now seem to spring up again in their glory, and you see the storms that buried them, the ashes and torrents laden with boulders and mud, the centuries of sunshine, and the dark, lurid nights. You see again the vast floods of lava, red-hot and white-hot, pouring out from gigantic geysers, usurping the basins of lakes and streams, absorbing or driving away their hissing, screaming waters, flowing around hills and ridges, submerging every subordinate feature. Then you see the snow and glaciers taking possession of the land, making new landscapes. How admirable it is that after passing through so many vicissitudes of frost and fire and flood, the physiognomy and even the complexion of the landscape should still be so divinely fine. Thus, reviewing the eventful past, we see nature working with enthusiasm like a man, blowing her volcanic forges like a blacksmith blowing his smithy fires, shoving glaciers over the landscapes like a carpenter shoving his planes, clearing, plowing, harrowing, irrigating, planting, and sowing broadcast like a farmer and gardener, doing rough work and fine work, planting sequoias and pines, rose bushes and daisies, working in gems, filling every crack and hollow with them, distilling fine essences, painting plants and shells, clouds, mountains, all the earth and heavens like an artist, ever working toward beauty higher and higher. Where may the mind find more stimulating, quickening pasturage? 1,000 Yellowstone wonders are calling. Look up and down and round about you, and a multitude of still, small voices may be heard, directing you to look through all this transient, shifting show of things, called substantial, into the truly substantial spiritual world, whose forms flesh and wood, rock and water, air and sunshine, only veil and conceal, and to learn that here is heaven and the dwelling place of the angels. The sun is setting. Long violet shadows are growing out over the woods from the mountains along the western rim of the park. Next to the light of the dawn on high mountain tops, the alpenglow is the most impressive of all the terrestrial manifestations of God. Now comes the gloaming. The alpenglow is fading into earthy, murky gloom. But do not let your town habits draw you away to the hotel. Stay on this good fire mountain and spend the night among the stars. Watch their glorious bloom until the dawn and get one more baptism of light. Then, with fresh heart, go down to your work, and whatever your fate, under whatever ignorance or knowledge you may afterward chance to suffer, you will remember these fine, wild views, and look back with joy to your wanderings in the blessed old Yellowstone wonderland. Chapter 3. The Yosemite National Park. Of all the mountain ranges I have climbed, I like the Sierra Nevada the best. Though extremely rugged, with its main features on the grandest scale in height and depth, it is nevertheless easy of access and hospitable, and its marvelous beauty, displayed in striking and alluring forms, woos the admiring wanderer on and on, higher and higher, charmed and enchanted, benevolent, solemn, fateful, pervaded with divine light. Every landscape glows like a countenance hallowed in eternal repose, and every one of its living creatures, clad in flesh and leaves, and every crystal of its rocks, whether on the surface shining in the sun, or buried miles deep in what we call darkness, is throbbing and pulsing with the heartbeats of God. All the world lies warm in one heart, yet the Sierra seems to get more light than other mountains. The weather is mostly sunshine, embellished with magnificent storms, and nearly everything shines from base to summit. The rocks, streams, lakes, glaciers, irised falls, and the forests of silver fir and silver pine. And how bright is the shining after summer showers and dewy nights, and after frosty nights in spring and autumn, when the morning sunbeams are pouring through the crystals on the bushes and grass, and in winter through the snow-laden trees. The average cloudiness for the whole year is perhaps less than 10/100. Scarcely a day of all the summer is dark, though there is no lack of magnificent thundering cumuli. They rise in the warm midday hours, mostly over the middle region in June and July, like new mountain ranges, higher sierras, mightily augmenting the grandeur of the scenery, while giving rain to the forests and gardens and bringing forth their fragrance. The wonderful weather and beauty inspire everybody to be up and doing. Every summer day is a work day to be confidently counted on, the short dashes of rain forming not interruptions but rests. The big blessed storm days of winter, when the whole range stands white, are not a whit less inspiring and kind. Well may the Sierra be called the Range of Light, not the Snowy Range, for only in winter is it white, while all the year it is bright. Of this glorious range, the Yosemite National Park is a central section, 36 miles in length and 48 miles in breadth. The famous Yosemite Valley lies in the heart of it, and it includes the headwaters of the Tuolumne and Merced rivers, two of the most songful streams in the world. Innumerable lakes and waterfalls and smooth, silky lawns, the noblest forests, the loftiest granite domes, the deepest ice-sculptured canyons, the brightest crystalline pavements, and snowy mountains soaring into the sky 12 and 13,000 feet, arrayed in open ranks and spiry pinnacled groups, partially separated by tremendous canyons and amphitheaters, gardens on their sunny brows, avalanches thundering down their long white slopes, cataracts roaring gray and foaming in the crooked, rugged gorges, and glaciers in their shadowy recesses working in silence, slowly completing their sculpture. Newborn lakes at their feet, blue and green, free or encumbered with drifting icebergs like miniature Arctic oceans, shining, sparkling, calm as stars. Nowhere will you see the majestic operations of nature more clearly revealed beside the frailest, most gentle and peaceful things. Nearly all the park is a profound solitude. Yet it is full of charming company, full of God's thoughts, a place of peace and safety amid the most exalted grandeur and eager, enthusiastic action, a new song, a place of beginnings, abounding in first lessons on life, mountain building, eternal, invincible, unbreakable order, with sermons in stones, storms, trees, flowers, and animals brimful of humanity. During the last glacial period just past, the former features of the range were rubbed off as a chalk sketch from a blackboard, and a new beginning was made. Hence the wonderful clearness and freshness of the rocky pages. But to get all this into words is a hopeless task. The leanest sketch of each feature would need a whole chapter, nor would any amount of space, however industriously scribbled, be of much avail. To defrauded town toilers, parks and magazine articles are like pictures of bread to the hungry. I can write only hints to incite good wanderers to come to the feast. While this glorious park embraces big, generous samples of the very best of the Sierra treasure, it is fortunately at the same time the most accessible portion. It lies opposite San Francisco, at a distance of about 140 miles. Railroads connected with all the continent reach into the foothills, and 3 good carriage roads from Big Oak Flat, Coulterville, and Raymond run into Yosemite Valley. Another, called the Tioga Road, runs from Crocker Station on the Yosemite Big Oak Flat Road near the Tuolumne Big Tree Grove, right across the park to the summit of the range by way of Lake Tenaya, the Big Tuolumne Meadows, and Mount Dana. These roads, with many trails that radiate from Yosemite Valley, bring most of the park within reach of everybody. The 3 main natural divisions of the park, the lower, middle, and alpine regions, are fairly well defined in altitude, topographical features, and vegetation. The lower, with an average elevation of about 5,000 feet, is the region of the great forests, made up of sugar pine, the largest and most beautiful of all the pines in the world, the silvery yellow pine, the next in rank, Douglas spruce, Libocedrus, the white and red silver firs, and the Sequoia gigantea, or big tree, the king of conifers, the noblest of a noble race. On warm slopes next to foothills there are a few sabine nut pines. Oaks make beautiful groves in the canyon valleys, and poplar, alder, maple, laurel, and Nuttall's flowering dogwood shade the banks of the streams. Many of the pines are more than 200 feet high, but they are not crowded together. The sunbeams streaming through their feathery arches brighten the ground, and you walk beneath the radiant ceiling in devout, subdued mood, as if you were in a grand cathedral with mellow light sifting through colored windows, while the flowery pillared aisles open enchanting vistas in every direction. Scarcely a peak or ridge in the whole region rises bare above the forests, though they are thinly planted in some places where the soil is shallow. From the cool, breezy heights you look abroad over a boundless waving sea of evergreens, covering hill and ridge and smooth flowing slope as far as the eye can reach, and filling every hollow and down-plunging ravine in glorious triumphant exuberance. Perhaps the best general view of the pine forests of the park, and one of the best in the range, is obtained from the top of the Merced and Tuolumne Divide near Hazel Green. On the long, smooth, finely folded slopes of the main ridge, at a height of 5,000 to 6,000 feet above the sea, they reach most perfect development, and are marshaled to view in magnificent towering ranks, their colossal spires and domes and broad palm-like crowns deep in the kind sky, rising above one another, a multitude of giants in perfect health and beauty, sun-fed mountaineers rejoicing in their strength, chanting with the winds, in accord with the falling waters. The ground is mostly open and inviting to walkers. The fragrant Kamabatia is outspread in rich carpets miles in extent. The manzanita in orchard-like groves, covered with pink bell-shaped flowers in the spring, grows in openings facing the sun, hazel and buckthorn in the dells. Warm browse are purple with mint, yellow with sunflowers and violets, and tall lilies ring their bells around the borders of meadows and along the ferny, mossy banks of the streams. Never was mountain forest more lavishly furnished. Hazel Green is a good place quietly to camp to get acquainted with the trees and birds, to drink the reviving water and weather, and to watch the changing lights of the big charmed days. The rose light of dawn, creeping higher among the stars, changes to daffodil yellow. Then come the level, enthusiastic sunbeams pouring across the feathery ridges, touching pine after pine, spruce and fir, libocedrus and lordly sequoia, searching every recess until all are awakened and warmed. In the white noon they shine in silvery splendor, every needle and cell in bole and branch thrilling and tingling with ardent life, and the whole landscape glows with consciousness. The hours go by uncounted. The evening flames with purple and gold. The breeze that has been blowing from the lowlands dies away, and far and near, the mighty host of trees baptized in the purple flood stand hushed and thoughtful, awaiting the sun's blessing and farewell, as impressive a ceremony as if it were never to rise again. When the daylight fades, the night breeze from the snowy summits begins to blow, and the trees, waving and rustling beneath the stars, breathe free again. It is hard to leave such camps and woods. Nevertheless, to the large majority of travelers, the middle region of the park is still more interesting, for it has the most striking features of all the Sierra scenery, the deepest sections of the famous canyons, of which the Yosemite Valley, Hetch Hetchy Valley, and many smaller ones are wider portions, with level park-like floors and walls of immense height and grandeur of sculpture. This middle region holds also the greater number of the beautiful glacier lakes and glacier meadows, the great granite domes, and the most brilliant and most extensive of the glacier pavements. And though in large part it is severely rocky and bare, it is still rich in trees, the magnificent silver fir, Abies magnifica, which ranks with the giants, forms a continuous belt across the park above the pines, at an elevation of from 7,000 to 9,000 feet, and north and south of the park boundaries to the extremities of the range, only slightly interrupted by the main canyons. The two-leaved or tamarack pine makes another less regular belt along the upper margin of the region, while between these two belts and mingling with them, in groves or scattered, are the mountain hemlock, the most graceful of evergreens, the noble mountain pine, the Jeffrey form of the yellow pine with big cones and long needles, and the brown, burly, sturdy western juniper. All these, except the juniper, which grows on bald rocks, have plenty of flowery brush about them, and gardens in open spaces. Here, too, lies the broad, shining, heavily sculptured region of primeval granite, which best tells the story of the glacial period on the Pacific side of the continent. No other mountain chain on the globe, as far as I know, is so rich as the Sierra in bold, striking, well-preserved glacial monuments. Every feature is more or less glacial, and this park portion of the range is the brightest and clearest of all. Not a peak, ridge, dome, canyon, lake basin, garden, forest, or stream, but in some way explains the past existence and modes of action of flowing, grinding, sculpting, soil-making, scenery-making ice, for notwithstanding the post-glacial agents, air, rain, frost, rivers, earthquakes, avalanches, have been at work upon the greater part of the range for tens of thousands of stormy years, engraving their own characters over those of the ice. The latter are so heavily emphasized and enduring, they still rise in sublime relief, clear and legible through every after inscription. The streams have traced only shallow wrinkles as yet, and avalanche, wind, rain, and melting snow have made blurs and scars, but the change effected on the face of the landscape is not greater than is made on the face of a mountaineer by a single year of weathering. Of all the glacial phenomena presented here, the most striking and attractive to travelers are the polished pavements, because they are so beautiful, and their beauty is of so rare a kind, unlike any part of the loose, earthy lowlands where people dwell and earn their bread. They are simply flat or gently undulating areas of solid resisting granite, the unchanged surface over which the ancient glaciers flowed. They are found in the most perfect condition at an elevation of from 8,000 to 9,000 feet above sea level. Some are miles in extent, only slightly blurred or scarred by spots that have at last yielded to the weather, while the best preserved portions are brilliantly polished and reflect the sunbeams as calm water or glass, shining as if rubbed and burnished every day, notwithstanding they have been exposed to plashing, corroding rains, dew, frost, and melting sloppy snows for thousands of years. The attention of hunters and prospectors, who see so much in their wild journeys, is seldom attracted by moraines, however regular and artificial looking, or rocks, however boldly sculptured, or canyons, however deep and sheer-walled. But when they come to these pavements, they go down on their knees and rub their hands admiringly on the glistening surface, and try hard to account for its mysterious smoothness and brightness. They may have seen the winter avalanches come down the mountains, through the woods, sweeping away the trees and scouring the ground, but they conclude that this cannot be the work of avalanches, because the striae show that the agent, whatever it was, flowed along and around and over the top of high ridges and domes, and also filled the deep canyons. Neither can they see how water could be the agent, for the strange polish is found thousands of feet above the reach of any conceivable flood. Only the winds seem capable of moving over the face of the country in the directions indicated by the lines and grooves. The pavements are particularly fine around Lake Tenaya, and have suggested the Indian name Piwiak, the Lake of the Shining Rocks. Even dogs and horses, on their first journeys into this region, study geology to the extent of gazing wonderingly at the strange brightness of the ground, and pawing it and smelling it as if afraid of falling or sinking. In the production of this admirable hard finish, the glaciers in many places exerted a pressure of more than 100 tons to the square foot, planing down granite, slate, and quartz alike, showing their structure, and making beautiful mosaics where large feldspar crystals form the greater part of the rock. On such pavements the sunshine is at times dazzling, as if the surface were of burnished silver. Here also are the brightest of the Sierra landscapes in general. The regions lying at the same elevation to the north and south were perhaps subjected to as long and intense a glaciation, but because the rocks are less resisting, their polished surfaces have mostly given way to the weather, leaving here and there only small imperfect patches on the most enduring portions of canyon walls, protected from the action of rain and snow, and on hard bosses kept comparatively dry by boulders. The short, steeply inclined canyons of the east flank of the range are in some places brightly polished, but they are far less magnificent than those of the broad west flank. One of the best general views of the middle region of the park is to be had from the top of a majestic dome, which long ago I named the Glacier Monument. It is situated a few miles to the north of Cathedral Peak, and rises to a height of about 1,500 feet above its base, and 10,000 above the sea. At first sight it seems sternly inaccessible, but a good climber will find that it may be scaled on the south side. Approaching it from this side, you pass through a dense bryanthus-fringed grove of mountain hemlock, catching glimpses now and then of the colossal dome, towering to an immense height above the dark evergreens. And when at last you have made your way across the woods, wading through azalea and ledum thickets, you step abruptly out of the tree shadows and mossy, leafy softness upon a bare porphyry pavement, and behold the dome unveiled in all its grandeur. Fancy a nicely proportioned monument 8 or 10 feet high, hewn from one stone, standing in a pleasure ground. Magnify it to a height of 1,500 feet, retaining its simplicity of form and fineness, and cover its surface with crystals. Then you may gain an idea of the sublimity and beauty of this ice-burnished dome, one of many adorning this wonderful park. In making the ascent, one finds that the curve of the base rapidly steepens until one is in danger of slipping, but feldspar crystals 2 or 3 inches long that have been weathered into relief afford slight footholds. The summit is in part burnished, like the sides and base, the striae and scratches indicating that the mighty Tuolumne Glacier, 2 or 3,000 feet deep, overwhelmed it while it stood firm, like a boulder at the bottom of a river. The pressure it withstood must have been enormous. Had it been less solidly built, it would have been ground and crushed into moraine fragments, like the general mass of the mountain flank in which at first it lay embedded, for it is only a hard residual knob or knot with a concentric structure of superior strength, brought into relief by the removal of the less resisting rock about it, an illustration in stone of the survival of the strongest and most favorably situated. Hardly less wonderful when we contemplate the storms it has encountered since first it saw the light is its present unwasted condition. The whole quantity of post-glacial wear and tear it has suffered has not diminished its stature a single inch, as may be readily shown by measuring from the level of the unchanged polished portions of the surface. Indeed, the average post-glacial denudation of the entire region, measured in the same way, is found to be less than 2 inches, a mighty contrast to that of the ice, for the glacial denudation here has been not less than a mile. That is, in developing the present landscapes, an amount of rock a mile in average thickness has been silently carried away by flowing ice during the last glacial period. A few erratic boulders nicely poised on the founded summit of the monument tell an interesting story. They came from a mountain on the crest of the range, about 12 miles to the eastward, floating like chips on the frozen sea, and were stranded here when the top of the monument emerged to the light of day, while the companions of these boulders, whose positions chanced to be over the slopes where they could not find rest, were carried farther on by the shallowing current. The general view from the summit consists of a sublime assemblage of ice-born mountains and rocks, and long wavering ridges, lakes and streams and meadows, moraines and wide-sweeping belts, and beds covered and dotted with forests and groves, hundreds of square miles of them composed in wild harmony. The snowy mountains on the axis of the range, mostly sharp-peaked and crested, rise in a noble array along the sky to the eastward and northward, the gray-pillared Hoffman Spur and the Yosemite domes, and a countless number of others to the westward. Cathedral Peak with its many spires and companion peaks and domes to the southward, and a smooth, billowy multitude of rocks, from 50 feet or less to 1,000 feet high, which from their peculiar form seem to be rolling on westward, fill most of the middle ground. Immediately beneath you are the big Tuolumne Meadows, with an ample swath of dark pine woods on either side, enlivened by the young river that is seen sparkling and shimmering as it sways from side to side, tracing, as best it can, its broad glacial channel. And with that evocative language from John Muir, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Our National Parks, which remains as poetic a description of the American wilds as one could wish for. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see the photographs it contains, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.